Welcome back. Tony Abbott said he plans to shine a great big light on the dark corners of the community. He says it's the widespread culture of corruption in unions. The Prime Minister tried to highlight that this sword will cut both ways. He said a corrupt culture takes two sides to be involved and that any business in dodgy, corrupt or criminal behaviour should also be sanctioned. But just how far the Royal Commission will actually go and who precisely will be compelled to front up and give evidence and what will be the findings will be determined by the Royal Commissioner, former High Court Judge Dyson Heydon. So is it a much needed attempt to stop widespread corrupt practices as the government is portraying it, or is it a political witch hunt, as Labor and the union movement says, meant to severely embarrass the Labor opposition and its leader Bill Shorten, himself a former union chief? Well, on the eve of Parliament returning tomorrow for the first sitting day for the year, I'm joined by Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer, Steve Ciobo, and Labor MP for the New South Wales seat of Throsby, Stephen Jones, both in our Canberra studio. Gentlemen, thanks very much for joining me. Now, let's talk about, I know I've promoted the union, the Royal Commission really, but I'd really like to get your views about Toyota. I mean, is it necessary that this had to happen? Steve Ciobo, should the government have been able to do more to keep Toyota here?
Well, Helen, I think we've seen now for a number of years a fairly consistent theme that's emanated from manufacturers in Australia, in particular car manufacturers, and they've said, look, the world has changed. The reality is that Australia is a high-cost manufacturing base, and there's a variety of reasons for that, and clearly the high Aussie dollar is one of them. The fact that we're a fairly small market is another one of them, and even I noticed that Max Yasuda made comments last year that an inflexible industrial relations system was also contributing to some of the challenges that they face. So there's been consistency from all the manufacturers for some time now about what the problem is. Australian taxpayers under successive governments have tipped subsidies in the tune of billions of dollars into car manufacturing. I think we've reached the point now where as a nation we can no longer justify those subsidies, and indeed neither can the car manufacturers themselves.
Stephen Jones, would you have kept the subsidies going?
We had this important pillar of manufacturing in this country, so it's a very sad day. What you've effectively seen is the government not only opened the door to push Holden's and now Toyota's offshore, but actually urging them to go, and the Treasurer was doing exactly that.
All right, Stephen, I'm sorry.
I don't think it had to happen. And yes, we were willing to work with the industry and the workforce to ensure that we could keep this important piece of manufacturing in the country.
So in a sense, wouldn't you have just been delaying the inevitable?
Look, I don't believe so. I think that we could have had a viable manufacturing, automotive manufacturing industry in this country. All of the factors that Steve talked about are true.
But all thanks to taxpayers only. I mean, they obviously cannot stand on their own 2 feet. As devastating as this is for the workers, who Toyota chief today paid great tribute to, but the companies could not stand on their own 2 feet.
Any one of the companies couldn't. We needed the agglomeration, if you like, of each of those automotive companies in the country to make the industry viable. And when Ford and Holden went, it was almost like the writing was on the wall for Toyota. But I believe, particularly with Toyota, which was making cars that Australians wanted to buy, cars that were exportable around the world, that there was a viable business there, and Holden was also in a position to be in that same position. More could have been done to have linked us into global supply chains, and I think more could have and should have been done to keep those critical companies in the country. I think we could have fashioned a viable industry here in Australia.
Steve Ciobo, Joe Hockey did virtually goad Holden out of the country. He was very aggressive towards the company in Parliament. Do you think he will have to wear some of the political blame for this decision by Toyota?
Helen, not for one moment do I agree with your preface there. To say that he goaded them is the line that Labor likes to run. It's completely untrue. It's completely without foundation.
Well, what would you call it? He was very aggressive towards the company in that last sitting of Parliament.
Well, Helen, if you truly believe that the Treasurer's comments to say to Holden to put up or shut up were the reason why they decided to close Australian
No, I
operations,
said he was goading them. I didn't say it was the only reason.
Well, what he said was that Holden needed to make clear what their intentions were because they were playing games. But Helen, could I just go to a further point, which is Stephen's got a job to do here tonight, and I get that. You know, the Labor Party wants to try to make out that this is about the coalition not doing enough to support our industry. But the problem is, Helen, that in denying the reality, and I outlined to you the reasons why all three companies have almost been on the same song sheet when it comes to their closures, in denying that reality and in trying to score a cheap political point, Labor misses the fact that all Australians get that actually under Labor we saw two things: the closure of Ford, and we also saw the former Labor Prime Minister Julia Gillard stand up and write another taxpayers' cheque of $215 million to Holden, which she announced at the time secured Holden's future for 10 years. And yet, lo and behold, Holden also closed down. So, you know, I think that it's pretty clear to all Australians what's taking place. I think Labor should stop playing political games, put it behind them and get focused on the future about what we can do to get these people back into meaningful work, to retrain them, to reskill them, because that's where the future is.
All right, do you think...
I can't disagree more. I mean, obviously providing assistance to industry was okay when it was in your political interest. You'll have to convince the voters of Australia that it's more important to subsidise the chocolate maker Cadbury than it was to work with business in the automotive industry. So it's not a philosophical objection here. You basically made the decision that you didn't want auto in the country and then goaded them out the door.
All right, well, Steve Ciobo, you did mention, you know, that both sides should be concentrating on how these workers can be re-employed, redeployed once they do lose their jobs at the car industry. Hopefully that would dominate Parliament, which is starting again tomorrow for the year. But I suspect, in fact, the government's announcement today of the Royal Commission into the union movement and into corruption there will very much dominate the Parliament, at least for this week, and that will certainly give your side of politics, Steve Ciobo, a big advantage.
Well, Helen, what we're focused on is making Australia a more competitive nation into the future. We understand that it is a very competitive world. Australia, unfortunately, has lost a lot of the productivity gains that we've seen in past decades. We haven't taken historically, especially in the past 6 years, a lot of the meaningful reforms that we've needed to take. So we're very focused on productivity. Now, a key part of productivity is to focus not on the union movement. This isn't about the union movement. It's about the way in which, and when I say this, I'm talking about the Royal Commission. It's about the way in which there will be an inquiry into the operation of things such as slush funds, such as funds made available for campaigning, and that isn't confined to unions. So what we'll see over the next week is a clear enunciation about what we intend to do, what we want to get to the bottom of. And the reason I spoke about productivity is because we have seen time and time again examples of productivity sapping practices. We've seen examples of frameworks being put in place between unions and certain employers, between unions and organised criminal gangs that deliberately uphold inefficient, unproductive approaches to, for example, construction, that deliberately go to the bottom line and make all Australians worse off as a consequence.
Stephen Jones, is your leader, Bill Shorten, misreading the mood of the electorate in particular and really making a giant misstep? He's missing the opportunity to jump on this to try and root out all sorts of corruption within certain sections of unions, and he's still trying to say that it's a political stunt.
Yeah, look, I think Bill is absolutely spot on when he says there is absolutely no room for corruption inside the union movement, inside corporate boards, inside companies or in public life anywhere in Australia. And if there is evidence, then take it to the police, demand a thorough criminal investigation into it. Bill couldn't have been more firm, more direct on that. I wholeheartedly support him. But
Tony Abbott was also equally... Sorry, Stephen. Tony Abbott was equally firm before the election. He said, you know, he will hold a judicial inquiry into the unions. So the electorate knew that. They voted for the coalition. Now they've got something a bit stronger, certainly, because police investigations, by many accounts, do not result result in the sort of compulsion to give evidence on people, and that's why the government has moved to try and get a much stronger spotlight, in a sense, onto this.
Actually, if you read the terms of reference, they're quite enlightening, Helen. This is actually a political inquisition dressed up as a Royal Commission. Read the terms of reference. There's 10 of them. 9 of them focus on the political activities of unions more than anything else. If this was a government that was really interested in digging down into malfeasance and the problems in the building industry, you'd expect them to have a term of reference that said, why is $2.4 billion worth of debt going unpaid in the building industry? Not every 10 years, every year. Why is the building industry responsible for 24% of all the insolvencies of any of any industry in Australia? Why have we got this practice of corrupt phoenixing going on, workers not being paid? What's structurally wrong with the industry? If you're truly interested in nutting down and finding out what's going on in the industry, you'd have some terms of reference that go directly to that. But instead, we've got 10.
Wouldn't the building commissioner look at those sorts of things?
Helen, I would support a Royal Commission that looked at those issues. But this Royal Commission doesn't. It's a political inquisition into the political activities of unions and needs to be exposed as such.
All right, well,
if he was truly interested in looking at productivity and corruption, he'd be going to those much broader terms of reference.
Eric Abetz did say this sword will cut both ways, and presumably he is talking about business as well. But look, we are running out of time, and I did want to get your view, both of you, on the Griffith by-election, a post-mortem. Steve Ciobo, it's in your neck of the woods. What did you make of this? Because really both sides are claiming some victory in this by-election result.
Well, look, truthfully, Helen, the Australian people will have their own interpretation of what took place. From my perspective, I think it's pretty apparent. This was only the 4th time, I think, in Australian history where there's been a swing toward the government in a by-election. So the result runs completely contrary to Australian history. Secondly, this was the safest Labor seat in Queensland, so no surprises that Labor won it again. Of course they were going to win it again, that was always very likely, but to get a swing away from Bill Shorten and the Labor Party, to me just signifies that Australians can see straight through the scare campaign that Labor's been running. They recognise that they're not focused on a positive agenda. That's some of the points that I've been making to you earlier on in this interview, and I think that's the reason why there was a swing towards the coalition.
Peter Harcher, political editor in the Sydney Morning Herald Fairfax media, he said that it's really the electorate is reserving its judgment on the Abbott government. Would you agree with that?
Well, of course people are reserving their judgment. I mean, we're only a fairly new government. It's only been 5 or 6 months. The reality, though, Helen, is that there's often by-elections, and as I said, this is from my memory, only the 4th time in Australian history that there's been a swing to an incumbent government. So, yeah, I don't think Australians have made their minds up. We're a new government. They want to see what we're about. They want to see if we'll deliver on our promise, and that's why we remain steadfast about abolishing the world's biggest carbon tax, why we remain so focused on productivity enhancements, and why we're going to remain true to our word, and we're also going to get very focused on paying down all that debt that Labor left behind.
All right, a quick comment, Stephen Jones, on your view.
Yeah, let's not forget, first point, we actually lost the seat in 1996, so far from it being a safe traditional Labor seat, it hasn't always been. Good on Bill Glasson. He ran $1 million campaign, fought very hard, high-profile candidate, but I thought he was beaten on the issues by Terry, who's done a fantastic job. As to the government, well, I think people are starting to wake up and see that he's not necessarily the Prime Minister that he promised people he was going to be, and they're a bit distrustful of the culture of secretness, and they're concerned about the cuts to come in the forthcoming budget.
Is that why?
All right, gentlemen, we will have to leave it there. I do thank you both, Steve Ciobo and Stephen Jones. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Good luck in Parliament from now on.
Thank you.
And we will be back with you in a short moment. We'll be taking this short break. Stay with